You want to know why, or a few of the reasons why this war was even started in Iran. I think you could go back to even before 1971, but 1971 is a really great place to start because what was happening in 1971 was America was running out of gold. Because America was running out of gold, well, what happened? President Nixon moved to delink the gold backing from the US dollar. But now, since the US dollar didn't have an anchor to provide us value in the dollar, we need to find something to anchor to the US dollar to find a value again. We later found that value through control the petrodollar, and we stumbled on that into 1973, or stumbled on it in 1973. That's right when OPEC, which was the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, had gone ahead and implemented a total oil embargo against the countries who had supported the Yom Kippur War of 1967. They were also demanding in that embargo that Israel would give back the original borders to the Arab countries that were there before the war had ever happened. And that embargo hit us while we were already down. We were already sitting there dealing with inflation, dealing with increased demands that our refineries could not meet with oil. And then to have this oil embargo occur and the US not able to actually receive any oil from Saudi Arabia, it hit us. And why did they cut off the oil to the US? Because of the fact that in 1967, Richard Nixon was pressured into sending Israel weapons. So we were complicit in helping out Israel. So when that oil embargo came out, our economy was being even more crushed than it already was. And I think that the US completely underestimated the political weaponization of oil for Saudi to reach their demands. And the Saudi oil embargo was literally causing a global economic crisis to meet their goals. So the US decided to send in Henry Kissinger, to Saudi Arabia for negotiations. And initially, they didn't go anywhere. And through a series of negotiations, they later came to terms, but it was in a backroom deal that was all sealed by a handshake in Washington between Kissinger and the Saudi crown prince. So that made Kissinger as the architect for the American war machine. He was a neocon. And that very deal he had agreed to has funded every American war fundamentally for the last 50 years. Because in that deal, we also provided military sales and full defense of Saudi Arabia in return for all of their oil to be traded and be priced exclusively in US dollars. And within a year of that handshake, Kissinger had even convinced the rest of the OPEC countries to sell all their oil in only US dollars. And in that deal, Kissinger had added a second layer of that deal that had Saudi Arabia and the OPEC countries investing their surplus oil dollars back into the US debt securities and treasury bonds. And Kissinger called that petrodollar recycling. So now America could print dollars to fight wars, and the oil nations would buy that debt. So that objectively allowed the US to make the world fund its global dominance over the last 50 years. And now, how does that work? Well, if a country needs oil, they have to buy US dollars, which then creates more of a demand for US dollars. And then when the oil nation earns those said US dollars, they then immediately reinvest that money into US Treasury bonds, which then allows the US to borrow that money at almost no cost. So then we create this big cycle of printing, everyone's buying it, and we further the expansion of U.S. interests. And the reason that nobody knew about this was because there was a document that was created in 1974, and that document didn't even mention oil at all. In fact, it read as a framework for technology transfer, infrastructure development, and military support. The rest of the deal was done in a back room with a handshake. Everyone else just thought we had become best friends overnight. And again, nobody understood that we had brokered a backroom deal that Kissinger had created with the Saudi crown prince. Until 2016, when Michael Bloomberg, who is a pro-Israeli Zionist, uncovered this by filing a FOIA request with the National Archives. And the release of that information gave our enemies insight to the very pressure point that has kept America afloat economically for the last 50 years. And I think you still need to keep following the timeline and everything that's happening in the region, because in 2020, Trump created the Abraham Accords, which established a normalization of diplomacy between Israel and 7 of the Arab states. And of course, that deal almost went south immediately, because by 2020, the majority of Saudis had believed that they should cut ties with Israel. And that belief was probably stemming from the fact that a deal that was meant to provide peace within those Arab countries was seemingly only being used for profit by Israel and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, but also a way for more violence to be committed by Israel. And so the Arab countries had started to condemn Israel in their actions. And then if you go to some of the other facts that were happening, well, in March of 2023, Iran and Saudi started peace talks in which China was helping to mediate. And you have to understand that Iran and Saudi, historically speaking, haven't had the best relations due to Saudi having a Sunni population and Iran having a majority Shiite population. So again, they haven't had the best relations throughout the years. And despite that China was helping out, the US was okay with that. They were okay with China coming and helping to mediate the violence that was occurring in the Middle East. We had zero opposition of these countries being willing to create peace. But of course, Israel hated that idea because Iran was the only country that Israel had deemed a threat to their existence. And keep in mind, Iran was never even in the Abraham Accords and probably wouldn't have wanted to be because of the fact that they didn't agree with Israel and Israel's continued aggressions. And despite all that stuff that was still going on, Saudi Arabia and Iran came to terms of peace through the Beijing Agreement, and both countries vowed to reopen their embassies in each other's countries. And when that peace agreement happened, what occurred after? Well, Saudi started to more openly condemn Israel and the ethnic cleansing that they were committing at the time in Palestine, still to this very day. And Iran was also willing to strike Israel for their continued aggressions in the region. And if you look at the evidence, Israel is the sole reason for the Abraham Accords failing to ever get started. And in 2025, Saudi Arabia diplomatically started to support Iran, while even more openly condemning Israel's actions. And a month later, after that, we also know that U.S. intelligence community, the DIA also specifically, was one of the agencies that put out a threat assessment that denied any allegations of Iran having any weapons of mass destruction or any capabilities of their weapons to hit the U.S. And despite what our intelligence agencies were telling us at the time, Israel still provoked us to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities in Operation Midnight Hammer. So here we are, and through more provocation, the U.S. was forced into this current war, but this time by both Israel and Saudi Arabia, because once again, you're starting to see the U.S. war machine firing on all cylinders, being utilized as a puppet by foreign powers with our sons and our daughters in the front and not theirs. And probably this is also in part of the fact because our politicians on both sides of the table have been bought and paid for the past 60, 70 years by Zionist organizations and billionaires abroad who only will ever seek their interests and who will only ever seek the furtherment of Israel as a regional superpower. And since our agreement between Saudi and Kissinger had ended in 2024, the US dollar has also lost its value because Saudi no longer has that obligation to make the US dollar the only form of currency to trade across the world. So now our economy is at its breaking point. And this time, if it breaks, it's going to be a lot worse than any of the other times before that. And all these Middle Eastern countries know that because Michael Bloomberg also released all that information. And so now we're being exploited. And now our sons and our daughters are once again being sent to fight and to die on foreign soil. And what's going to be the outcome, huh? Like the entire collapse of the global economy, all to usher in a new world order with a new financial backing, since our old one is collapsing. And all the actions thus far pretty on par. I mean, Israel's destroying all these oil fields. You have Israel's destruction of Tehran's oil fields, the Aramco bombing by 2 Mossad agents that's seemingly being covered up on mainstream media. And what about now the Valero incident? Because I'm sure at some point there's going to be more details that will come out about that point in a different direction than yet another accident. So there you have it. I mean, we're literally being played, forced into a war, while pro-Israeli Zionists blackmail our politicians and are tanking the very thing that has kept our economy in balance for the last 50 years. And probably because they know that they're all at the end of the line and that the people are not going to allow them to do this and to suck the very life out of this country. But I can promise you this, that the US dollar is looking as if it's going to fail because once again, the dollar has no backing as of 2024. And now, any hopes of that coming back, we're all watching it burn in this war. I mean, the war is ensuring that we do not come back or get our footing for a very long time. So I think it's time that the people start standing up and that we start getting rid of this cancer in DC with the greedy, selfish individuals who have only ever placed their goals above the betterment of our country, the pedophiles and the Satan worshipers who will sit there and exploit our youth. I mean, it's the same group of Zionist politicians that JFK tried to stop before he was killed. And it's the same group of Zionists who Richard Nixon had warned every single one of you about because they were running every office in DC. And of course, he was hit with a timely scandal before he left office. And it's not anti-Semitic to say that because those are all historical facts. Those are all statements to say there. But they want you to say those things so they can call you anti-Semitic because it, just like Herzl said, Zionists and anti-Semites run hand in hand. And they want us to push all of them back to the Middle East so they can achieve their regional goals. But it's not anti-Semitic to call out the facts. And no longer should we sit there and allow these people to dictate our lives and drive us into these forever wars with all of America's best every time. So the people need to start waking up and realizing that this has been the plan all along. Otherwise, I don't know where else this country is going to be going, but it's not looking good.